My name is Amanda Elder. I'm part of the spirits team here at Skurnik Wine and Spirits. We're in the office today having a seminar called Widening the Lens, which is essentially a conversation about how to incorporate challenging and esoteric spirits into bar programs and retail shops. In my section in particular, we're going to be talking about menu design and how everything from where cocktails are placed on the page to how they're described can start to inform people and their decision making. In this particular section, we're going to talk about what's on the page. For restaurants and bars, we're really talking specifically about menus. If it's retail, we may be talking about shelf talkers. Within our industry, I think we have this really amazing ability to be students of human nature as much as we are purveyors of hospitality. Every single time we work or we interact with people, we get a better sense of what works and what doesn't. And I'm endlessly fascinated by how that can change what people want to drink. For me in particular, I'm a bartender and I was a server for a very long time. I'm also a graphic designer. For pouring ribbons in particular, they became really well known for this matrix that they set up, which plotted all of the drinks on this first page when you open the menu from at the top, refreshing to spirituous on the bottom, comforting to adventurous on the side. Plenty of people would come into the bar and they'd be on dates and stuff and they would pick drinks for each other, not even ever looking at the description. Of course, this was on the first page, eye-catching, big colors, so that helped. But then when you get to the second page, it was all about house cocktails, so cocktails that were specific to the bar. On the next page were classics. And I can tell you for as long as we stayed with this particular setup with the menu, house cocktails always sold better than classics. And I think that was for two reasons. One was because they were called house cocktails. If people were taking the time to go to a specific place, they wanted things that they thought were specific to that bar. And even though the classics were curated carefully, maybe interesting choices were being made about how those drinks were being balanced, people got the impression that those were drinks they could get anywhere, so they just weren't ordered as often. The other thing is that the house cocktails were placed directly on this first page. So it's a multi-page document, which means a lot of the stuff in the middle is going to end up getting lost. You can see they started doing spirits in the middle because rarely are people really looking specifically for a list of spirits, but in a cocktail bar especially, they want to know what the options are, so first page was always best for that. As time moved on, we switched the plots on the grid to actual drink glass shapes because we were realizing over time that meant a lot to people too. So the glassware started to definitely inform how people were making decisions and being able to see that on the page before they had to ask. Just because you're putting something on the page as far as the brands, the ingredients, it doesn't mean people can visualize what it is that they're going to be tasting once they get it. The first one we did was a Route 66 menu, so Americana nostalgia. We wanted something that people would easily be able to connect some ideas with, because people weren't thinking of them as this boring thing. The imagery connected to it helped as well. I started seeing the power of a name because the more interesting people thought the name was, the more willing they were to try things that maybe they wouldn't have been before. But there can be an interesting balance in that too, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Some of these other examples, Mace from the East Village as well. Obviously this menu has seen some love in its time. It's one of their original ones, spring 2015 as a matter of fact. I like the idea of including brand names on menus because I want to educate the consumers about what it is that they like to drink. And not all spirits are made the same. It's good to start getting people used to asking for certain things or being comfortable with certain brand names. I have a couple of menus here from France. This one from Candelaria that I think did a really interesting thing where rather than saying the brand name and then the descriptor, so Absolute Vodka, they start with vodka and then Absolute is the second word, so you immediately know what you're working with, and then the brand name becomes secondary information. It's still there for anyone who wants it. So let's get started on some drink stuff. How's about it? We're essentially going to do a little bit of an experiment today with two different cocktails. So we're going to start this conversation by saying that Menthe Pastille, Giffard's Menthe Pastille, is really the most challenging ingredient in this drink. We have had conversations here about how the American market just, it's not their intuitive jam to want mint liqueur. It's not a flavor that we grew up having. In France, this is a really common digestif. I had personal concerns about how much it might get sent back because people ordered it for one ingredient but were displeased with sort of having to deal with the other ingredient, and you never kind of want to sneak people into having something. You want their expectations to be met. If you can surprise them with something new and exciting, awesome, but that's sort of like the secondary hope of the situation, I think, a lot of the time. So take a look at these other descriptors that we have on here. The second one down, now we're gonna get rid of all of the brand information, and we're gonna sort of distill this down to something that might be a little bit easier to digest on the page. Reposado tequila, lemon, passion fruit, mint, cocoa, and hellfire bitters. I like these flavors together as a combination. Very popular these days. There are a couple different ways that people can incorporate it into cocktails. We have the Chiffard passion fruit here, which I find to be really useful in a lot of different applications. Looking at this description, would you say that this is a drink that is shaken or stirred? Shaken. So at Pouring Ribbons, when I first started doing these menus, we had a conversation about the formula for describing drinks. Rarely ever did we find that the formula always fit the drink, and we always had to sort of move things around based on what we were working with. The general idea that was introduced to me was to start with your base spirit first, so people know sort of like the primary ingredient that they're working with. If it's a stirred cocktail, the second thing should be the primary modifier. So if we're talking about a Manhattan, where vermouth is not the base spirit, but that primary modifier, that should come second. And then if you have anything interesting, an out of the ordinary modifier or a bitter, that should come third, because you want to punctuate that sentence with something that's going to stay in people's memories. If it's a shaken drink, you're still staying with that primary ingredient first, and then the citrus component is usually placed next. This is sort of the cue to imply to people that this is a shaken cocktail. So say you were expecting something that was like a riff on a margarita, because you see lemon or lime, you see tequila, you see passion fruit. If you got this drink, you're going to be disappointed with it. So let's take a look at the second one. We're keeping brand out of it. So still Reposado tequila, passion fruit second, mint liqueur, cocoa, hellfire bitters. How do you feel about the word liqueur? Or the word
great.
syrup.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Traditionally speaking, how do people respond to that?
They're going to think it's too sweet.
They're going to think it's too sweet. So we're saying specifically that this is Jalisco Reposado tequila. This was also important for me because I actually think I've tried this drink with many other Reposado tequilas as well. I've tried to recreate it outside of this office, and it never works. It always falls apart. This particular Reposado, for one reason or another, maintains the structure for this drink in a way that none of the others will. I've also mentioned the brand because not all creme de menthes are made alike. Some are sweeter than others, some are colored, some are not. I also like the idea that it's called menthe pastis instead of creme de menthe, because I think you might sneak it past people just enough where, because you're not using words like creme or syrup or liqueur, it's not going to trigger something in them to be afraid of what they're getting. Let's take a look at cocktail number 2. So this one has more ingredients than the first one that we tried, by a goodly amount. I have this firm belief that people's primary interest when they go to a bar is not to have a drink. That's secondary. Their primary interest is to not look like an idiot in front of their friends and in a social setting. And a lot of what goes into that is being able to order something, sound intelligent when they do it, and then end up with something that they enjoy drinking, that they don't have to catch someone's attention to send back, or that's going to embarrass them in some way because it wasn't what they were expecting.
They'll almost choose the most basic thing on the menu, or they'll go to like the bourbon cocktail or the tequila cocktail, knowing what they want to expect. And if you can pull that off, because I see those as the simple things, then you get to move on to stage 2.
Do you feel that brandy is a popular choice for cocktails these days?
More so than in the past.
Growing.
Yeah.
People are getting more adventurous in general with what they drink. For something like our Chateau de Pelot, this is a smaller producer, so probably not as well known as a lot of the bigger brand names that people are familiar with. We've got not one, but 2 expressions from Lustau. Spanish for vermouth. Vermouth, we're being true to the name in this descriptor. We have our mezcal, which is always going to be a popular, well, I don't know if it's always, I feel like it's always going to be a popular ingredient in cocktails these days. That's kind of sandwiched in the middle, where it could easily sort of be gleaned over. And then we have Vicario Savage cherry liqueur, delicious cherry liqueur, one that a lot of people haven't tasted on its own. We're also still using the word liqueur, so again, nervous making. JM syrup to cane, so cane syrup, which this drink needs for body, mole bitters and celery bitters. I've emphasized brand names in places and de-emphasized it in others. I still think this starts to get a little bit muddled. So I feel like this is starting to get a little bit closer to a true description. Let's try a couple others just to see what we think. And then let's look at this last one. which is sort of like the best of all of these worlds, I think. This is a cherry liqueur. It's a very specific type of cherry that they're using. I love that they call it Savage Cherry. There's something about that that feels a little bit more rock and roll. Drinks that are meant to sort of start educating people about weirder stuff still have to be done in the most friendly way possible, and I think everyone within all of the job roles within a restaurant or a retail shop, or if you're promoting brands, this is all about the vocabulary that's constantly used. And this is very much a completely different type of a language that we're sort of putting out there in the world for other people to learn. And I think it's very important to remember that not everyone is on the same level with that. Everyone can enjoy what's in the glass, but how you get them there is a different thing. And we didn't talk a lot about cocktail names, which we could have as well, but how that can start to hint at how a drink is going to feel. I have a firm belief personally that you can have a lot of weird stuff in a cocktail with a simple name that people are going to get, or you can have a really simple cocktail with a really weird esoteric name, but you can't mix them up, because if they don't get any sort of idea of the vibe of a drink from the name, and they also can't understand any of the ingredients, then you're sort of ruined from the get-go. Like, you really have to start pushing around people's preconceived notions about flavor that they don't even realize they're doing necessarily. And massaging the other words around the ingredients can start to do that, and I think names can start to do that as well. All right, guys, that is us for us. That is it for us. Thank you so much. This was awesome. You guys were great.